Hello folks, welcome to the Age of Asparagus. By the end of this video, we'll have some recoil and reloading animations, and you'll be able to reload by hitting the R key. I guess we should start by fixing the bug I accidentally left at the end of the last episode. Thanks to Mitt Malavia for mentioning this in the comments. So it turns out that with a multi-fire weapon like this, if you're hitting an enemy multiple times, you can see down here that it's going to kill 3 enemies. And now this has wrecked our whole spawning and waves because now it thinks there's 3 enemies. It's causing all sorts of problems. It'll also cause a problem if you happen to kill them and then do a level transition. You might get an error because an enemy might have been spawning in the middle of the level transition because it thinks more enemies that have been killed than you've actually killed. So let's try and figure out what is causing this problem. So somewhere enemies are being killed. The queue free for the enemies, where is the queue free for the enemies? It's probably in the spawner. That's where it's all being tracked, right? So let's go into the spawner class, and here we go. On enemy stats, you died signal. So if this is printing out multiple times, then it means the spawner is receiving the signal multiple times from the enemy stats node. So why don't we go to that enemy stats node? We'll go to an enemy, the enemy scene here. And in enemy stats, let's take a look at that script. So we can see here the enemy with a multi-fire weapon is could take 2 hits before it's dead, 2 hits or even 3 at the same time. Then it's gonna cause this die method to be called 3 times because the current hit points is gonna be 0, then -1, then 1, and then the signal will be sent 3 times. So to prevent that from happening, let's just create a new variable up here. We'll call it dead, and we'll set it equal to false. When we call the die method, we'll set the dead variable to true. And then, before we call the die method maybe on the second hit that came through, or in the third hit on those second and third bullets, we'll check if the current hit points is less than or equal to 0, and not dead. So one of them is going to come through first. It will set dead to true, and then the others will just pass through this if statement because he will be dead. So let's see if that works. Now to get this, you have to be real close so all the bullets hit him. There we go. Enemy killed 1, and my spawning is happening. So that should fix any bugs that came out of that. Now we're going to be working with the gun scene here a little bit, and I struggled with this on the last one. Where are we going? Weapons here. Let's go to the gun scene, and we'll go to the 3D view. And this is just kind of hard to edit with a black background. So I'm hitting 5 here to toggle between orthographic and perspective. We only really need this black background in our game, this void we made, right? For the rest of these, we just kind of want a nice way to 3D model and see our meshes without this awkward horizon and the light. It's just kind of all awkward. So what I want to do is this default environment here, I'm going to right-click and duplicate it, and I'm going to call it the game environment. This is the one we made. We changed the default environment so that our game would have a black void and some other small settings like fog. So here's our game environment. Now in the game scene, let's bring that back down again a little bit. Let's create an environment node. World environment node. And over here in the environment, we're going to drag the game environment that we copied over into the environment resource. There we go. Now for our actual default environment, and let's go back to the gun so we can see the default environment because this scene does not have a world environment, so it's just going to use this default. Let's double click it here, over here, and in the background, let's just reset this mode here, and I'm going to set it to color and sky. So what this is going to do is it's going to use a single color for the background everywhere, but it's still going to use the sky for lighting. Whereas if you just have a color, you can see the lighting is gone here, right? So let's go color and sky. And I'm also going to change this color here to a gray. Maybe maybe a gray something like somewhere around 60 here. Makes me feel like I'm in Blender, which is kind of what I want. And I think we still had fog. It looks like the fog's not on this, is it? Or it's not working. I'm going to turn off the fog here. We probably could have deleted this and just recreated it. So now when we're editing any scene that isn't our game, we can just have this kind of like Blender style viewport, which will make it a lot easier. Alright, now on to some more interesting things. Let's add the ability to run out of ammo and a little reloading animation. So we'll go into our gun script and we'll need to add some variables here. But maybe I'm going to do a little reorganization. Let's get all our export variables at the top. So I'll move these down. I'm going to move these two up here. I'm going to move the enum up to the top for our exports. We can join up all our exports. And our onReady variable, move it down here. We have this other export variable. I'll move that up with the other exports. Join all these together. I think the onReady var variable I'll just have right before ready. There we go. Let's see if that makes sense in our guns inspector here. The bullet, spawn locations, muzzle speed, millis between. That's not a very good name, is it? Millis between shots. That's all right. The fire mode, burst shots. Good. Okay, so now let's add one more. Export a new variable, and this one's going to be our magazine capacity. So I'll call this mag capacity, and we'll set it to, I'm not sure, 13. I'm thinking of like maybe like a Browning 9mm high power. And of course we'll also have to track how many bullets are in the magazine. So we can set that in a new variable. And we'll want to set this to the mag capacity. So in our ready method here, we reset the bursts. Why don't we also call a reload method? That doesn't exist yet. So I'll add it in the same order. I'll add it right after here, our reset bursts. So let's go function reload. And here, we'll pause and do a little animation. And then we'll refill the magazine. So that's going to be the easy part. We're just going to go set the bullets in mag equal to the magazine capacity. And now let's try and use this. So in our shoot method, we want to check if you can shoot and if there are still bullets in the mag. That should be bullets in mag, which probably means I need to rename that and bullets in mag. So the number of bullets in the magazine. So if we can shoot and there are bullets in the mag still, which if it's a non-zero value, it'll be truthy, then we can shoot. However, we'll add an elif here. If there are not bullets in the mag, then we'll reload. And I think we can get rid of this else statement here and just return false. Because that will return false if there's not bullets in the mag, or even if there is but we can't shoot for whatever reason, we're not shooting, it's going to return false. We don't need that else statement. So here we're shooting and we want to remove one bullet from the magazine. So let's do that after we start the rate of fire timer. We can decrement the bullets in the magazine by 1. I'm putting it here, which means even if you have a multi-shot weapon, it will only use up 1 bullet, even though if it's firing 3 at a time. If you want that to count as 3, you could put it up in here in the bullet spawn loop, However, you might have to do a little more work, because if there's only 2 bullets left and it's a spray of 3, it's still going to spray all 3, and it might cause you some problems if the bullets in the mag goes to -1. But this is going to work for me here. Now, we're not actually pausing when we reload yet, which means you probably won't even notice anything happening. There's no counter, so why don't we just see if this actually works. Let's just print reloading. And make sure that happens every 13 bullets or so. Seems like it's working. It's reloading every once in a while. Auto fire, it's going through pretty quick. So let's pause now and do a little animation. So one way we can pause is to use the yield method and send it a new timer. So we can get the tree, create a timer, give it a time. Let's say we have to pause for 1 second. And then the second parameter to a yield is which signal will cause this reload method to continue on. So it'll hit here and it'll wait till it receives this signal, and we're going to time out. So when this 1 second timer times out, it will carry on and go reloading. So let's just see that. Let's see if we get a little pause for 1 second. There's a pause. There's a pause. It is pausing, but we're reloading like a bazillion times because I'm still holding the trigger and I'm still trying to fire. There's no bullets left. Try and reload, reload. And so it's actually calling this method a bazillion times. It's causing a bazillion timers to be created and paused, and then when they time out, it does a whole bunch of reloads. We could try and work our way around this by, say, creating a reloading Boolean variable that the first time we go through we set it to true, which avoids this kind of buildup of timers and yields and reloads happening. But let's just use an animation player. That seems like it would be way better. It's a lot more fun to use. We don't need to do it here in the reloading. And let's see if we can get this to work. So let's go back to our 3D, and let's start by creating an animation. So we'll add a animation player here, animation player node to our gun, and down here we'll click on animation, and let's create a new one. We'll call this animation the reload animation. And I'm sure you've all dabbled with this in at least 2 dimensions. So we're going to create a new track here, or probably even easier than that is let's just use these keyframes over here. So let's click on what we want to keyframe, which is the gun itself. Now what we want to do is when we reload, we want the gun to kind of rotate up like this and then back down. I'm going to hit Control Z there to undo this. Before we do this though, let's fix up this gun. So currently the gun is not positioned at the origin, which is kind of annoying, and it's also even rotated on the y-axis 90 degrees. And that was to get the mesh pointing in the -Z direction, that way. But if we go to animate, that means when we want to return the gun to its position, first off it's going to rotate about its middle there. And when we return, we have to make sure we set the Y back to 90. It'd be nice if this was just all zeros, if it's the gun itself we're rotating. So to make that a little easier, I'm going to add a new spatial node in here that is just going to contain all the mesh info. And I'm going to call it mesh. And I'm going to move all the 3 mesh instances and the muzzle. I'm holding shift and clicking there. And then I'm going to drag them all underneath the mesh. And then the gun itself, I'm going to reset all of its transform, and instead I'm going to put this transform on the mesh, so its rotation 90 degrees and a Z value of about -1.7. So I'm just going to put that on here right now before I forget. -1.7, and then we're rotating on the Y by 90. Okay, and then the gun, hopefully I can reset that. I can reset that, and our gun is at the origin and our mesh is off a ways. That's what I want. Now, we're actually going to have to move our mesh in because I think it's going to be mounted so far out from our player, but we'll go take a look at that, how it actually gets mounted. But now we can actually just rotate, if in our animation, if you look at the transform, we can just rotate on about the x-axis, the red axis here, by maybe 25 or 30 degrees, send everything back to 0, and we're golden. Before we do the animation, we moved the muzzle, and I think that's going to wreck stuff. So why don't we just play our game and wreck it? There we go. So here we go. The gun is trying to find the muzzle, and now it needs to go mesh muzzle. So we're going to have to add the mesh in there. Mesh, muzzle, muzzle. Oops. Like that. Was that the only two? That was good. We could probably just add a reference up top, but there's only two of them. Okay, let's go back to the 3D view of the gun. And while we're here, I'm just going to select the mesh, and I'm just going to move it a little closer. I'm going to hit 3 on the number pad, and I'm going to move this in more like about there. So it looks like -1.4 for the Z value, Z translation of the mesh. And I just thought it was sticking too far out from the player. That looks a little better. Okay, so we're going to click the gun and go into the transform. Make sure you're on frame 0 here, and then keyframe the rotation. And we don't need Bezier curves. Let's just create that there. And I played around with this a little bit. You can too. I found that a 0.4 second animation seemed to work pretty well. We're going to need to zoom in here, so I can use this little zoom widget so that our animation takes up most of the screen here. And for this one, let's go, whoopsie, let's just go to 0.2, and that's where we'll add a rotation. And I'm going to add a rotation about the x-axis, and I'm just going to do 30 degrees. I played around a little bit. Like I said, you can play around again. I'll add a keyframe there, and then we'll go back to 0.4, the end of our animation. We'll reset it, and then keyframe it again. So if I click here, which is going to play the animation from the start, our reload animation is just going to look like this. Not bad. Okay, so let's go back into our script and make that happen. So when we are told to reload here, oops, I guess I didn't need to delete that. We'll animate the reloading. So we'll get our animation player, and we'll call the play method. There we go. Let's just play. And then helpful GD script here that Godot editor is going to give us the name of any animations we have, which is currently only that one. Now it's still going to reload. It's not going to pause because it's going to start playing the animation, then it'll just keep going and it'll refill the magazine. So we do want that pause, but let's just see if the animation works. Not bad. Keep shooting the whole time, of course. So one thing we can do is let's move this out. We don't need to say we're reloading. And put refilling the magazine in its own method. And then when the animation is done, we can call the refill mag method. So now in the animation player, we can add a track. This will be, we'll call a method. And which method are we going to call? The gun. And so when the animation is done, right here, we want to insert a key. I right-clicked there, insert a key, and let's find our method. Should be in here. Right there, refill mag. And then the refill mag method will be called at the end of the animation, which means that we won't have any bullets until that refill occurs and the gun is back down again. So let's see that going. There it is. Just a little kind of refill there. That's all right. One thing we might want to do is have a slightly different easing for our rotation. Right here, currently it's linear. It's just going sharply up and sharply down. And I'm going to choose cubic just to smooth it out a bit. You can barely even notice the difference, but it just seems a little nicer there and less choppy. Okay, while we're here, why don't we add some recoil? We already have an animation player. Let's add a new animation. We'll call this one Recoil. And in our gun, what do we want to do when we recoil? We want it to come back slightly and rotate up, but just slightly, right? Back and up. So I played around with this a lot. I'm just going to give the values that I found looked good. You can change these. So I'm going to keyframe at 0. Make sure we're on the frame 0. I'm going to keyframe the rotation and the translation here. I find leaving these as linear, just the sharp transitions, seems to look good for these ones. It's going to be quite short, so it'll be 0.2. And we want the recoil to be fast and then the resettling of the weapon to be a lot slower. So I'm going to set the... Can I even move it? I think I got snap on here, so I can either just type the value in here. I'm going to turn off snap on the timeline, and I'm going to go down to probably 0.1. So just 0.01. Is that what I want? I think it is. We're just going to rotate by 5 degrees on the X. And we're just going to move back slightly as well on the Z. And I'm just going to go back 0.3. Like that. Ooh, that looks like a lot. Okay, and then we'll keyframe both those. Then it will take a few seconds here. At the very end, 0.2. We'll reset both of those, keyframe them again. Oops. Reset that one, keyframe it. And then there's our recoil animation. You might want to fiddle with those values a little bit. Let's see what this looks like. It won't look like anything because we never call it. So we're going to want to call the animation player and play the recoil animation every time we fire. So let's go back to our gun script, and every time we fire here, you don't want this happening 3 times if you have multi-fire. So let's do it right before we return. Find the animation player, and we'll play. This time we'll play the recoil animation. Let's try that. So our fastest fire rate right now is 100 milliseconds per shot. That's 0.1 second per shot. So let's make our animation 0.1 second. We'll go to the animation player, and in our recoil animation, let's change this to 0.1. And I'm going to click and drag over these, and I'll move them back here to 0.1. And let's see how that looks. Oh yeah, that looks way better. It actually matches the rate that the bullets come out. Excellent. So if we have a slower fire rate than that, it should work perfect. And I think getting faster than that, the bullets don't actually come out any faster. Okay, I got a bit excited there with the animations, but I forgot one thing with reloading, and that is, well, we want a key to reload so that we can reload whenever we want. We should probably add the R key. So let's go up into our project settings, and in the input map, we'll add a new, we can call it reload. We'll add it. And for now, let's just add the R key. And we can close that. And then we'll go into our game. Actually, it'll be our player script here. And here underneath our shooting, let's check if we want to reload. So if input, we want is action just pressed. So if they're holding it down, it's not going to keep reloading. It's only when the first time they hit it. And then we'll go, okay, so right here, I guess I should say gun controller. So we have the gun controller. Let's go reload. This method doesn't exist yet on the gun controller. So we'll open the player scene, go to the gun controller script, and here at the bottom, we'll add the reload method. And we're going to want it to check if the weapon is equipped. And if it is, instead of calling the release here, we'll call reload. There we go. So let's check that. And make sure when I hit the R key, I reload. So we can test it by going Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure it worked. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Hit R. Yeah, I got tons more bullets. Right on.